Hi, welcome to the Reboot Loading Podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie.
Hello, everyone. On today's episode, I'm here with Brian Darby, who is the owner and the host of Hard Hitting Trivia. We're going to be talking about a few things today, a little bit about job loss, side hustles, and when you know the differences between a side hustle and a hobby. Welcome, Brian, to the Reboot Loading Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Stephanie.
So, what's going on?
Not much. We've just celebrated, we're just past 2,200 trivia shows that have been hosted over the past about 14 years now. And that has been a primary source of income for me, doing what may commonly be called pub or bar trivia, depending on what part of the country you are in or what part of the world you are in. Been hosting, writing games, and running that crazy type of business, entertainment business, for all these years.
I imagine that's a lot of work because you got to be on. When you're doing those shows, you have to be on.
You have seen me do a few of them.
Mhm.
And I think the big difference between the way I host and the way some of my peers host and others is we try to make it entertaining.
Mhm.
We are not sitting down in a corner. We are always standing. We are always in front, but we are trying our best to be entertaining. The whole idea of the business is for people to come in on a slow night, typically a weeknight, into a restaurant or establishment, spend a couple of hours, and then the key to it is for it to become a habit and for people to come back week after week. This week, we celebrated 10 years at one venue in Buford, Georgia, called Famous Joe's, but I have hosted for 10 years there practically every week, with the exception of the occasional vacation or the temporary shutdown during the pandemic. I have had people come in that have been playing for all these 10 years at that one particular venue that I have seen their children grow up and graduate high school and graduate college and move on. And what that essentially means is they have come once a week, bought food and drink, and that's how the restaurant makes the money, and that's how they afford to pay me.
Nice. I mean, 2,200 shows. That's a lot of shows.
So I ask 20 questions a game. So, you do the math on that. It's over 40,000 questions. You figure $60 worth of gift certificates at each show. So, you're talking over, you start talking $120,000 worth of chicken fingers and beer that have been handed out through all these years. Once it gets this large, I wholeheartedly admit that there are people that have jobs that are digging ditches, or teachers that are dealing with children, and to be able to fall into something like this has been just an absolute blessing or miracle of the universe, depending on what your beliefs are.
One of the things that I was looking at for this podcast, because it's all about career uncertainties, we go from everything from people who are trying to be entrepreneurs, who are established entrepreneurs, laid off, job loss. What do you want to be? What direction do you want to go into? And one thing I wanted to start doing is talking to people who have a unique job, something that you don't see every day. Trivia host and owner of a trivia company that's pretty unique in my opinion.
Well, the whole thing kind of starts a couple of years after high school. A good friend of mine from high school had been going to college over at the University of Georgia. And there was a gentleman over there that was a trivia host and had been since the mid 90s. So at this point, it's like 2003 is what we're talking about, somewhere around that timeline. And he had grown a following in that college town. And essentially, what ended up happening was I was invited to come play because when I was in elementary school with this friend, Brent Blackwell is the friend, we were academic bowl captains in elementary and middle school. So there's always been this component of trivia and game show in my life. So we played trivia for years and would enter tournaments that were crazy, that required us to drive everywhere. And then I consistently had people that knew me that said, this is what you should be doing. You should be doing something like this. And game show host has always been something that has been repeatedly brought up by friends and family from the time I was a little kid. When I was a little kid, I enjoyed watching Dick Clark host reruns of The Pyramid. Reruns were airing on USA. Bob Barker was one of, the people that I watched. Ray Combs when he was hosting Family Feud. And those were people that I identified with. And I also, as a child growing up in the South, watched a lot of professional wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
And so people like Tony Schiavone, who was the voice of Jim Crockett Promotions and World Championship Wrestling, WCW, which was based out of Atlanta. And even the in-ring announcers during that time in WCW. Gary Michael Capetta was a ring announcer that I grew up listening to. David Penzer later on in the WCW Nitro era. This is, I'm sure, just incredibly fascinating to all of your listeners right now. I actually want to say a disclaimer to everybody who's listening right now. If you are listening to this podcast and it makes coherent sense, it's because Stephanie has taken all of the little bits and pieces that I have said during the course of this conversation and edited them together into one coherent thought. But, to make a long story short, there was always sort of this entertainer or presentation idea. People have told me I should be a stand-up comedian. People have told me that I should be a radio DJ or a TV personality. And a lot of things turned me away from those ideas.
I was just about to say I agree with them all because I can definitely see you in every single one of those. But what's the but?
So in high school, I don't know how long we're going to go on this podcast. Everybody buckle up. As a freshman in high school, I was 6 feet tall and weighed 127 pounds. So nothing but skin and bones. Had a buzzed haircut, jeans and t-shirt or jeans and polo shirt, and that was pretty much it. And would always try to stay out of the limelight a little bit. And in 9th grade, I had a teacher in a career exploration class, a well-known educator in these parts. His name was Lawton Baggs. We lost him just a few years ago. He came to me and he told me, he said, I have a club in the afternoon, and every year we send a group off to a youth leadership organization called the Georgia Teen Institute. Got there, and it was the first time that I ever felt like I belonged somewhere. It was the first time where little cliques in high school didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And I was meeting people from all over the state. So I went as a participant that first year, and then I ended up being on staff for the organization. The third year I'm there, the opening session of the first day, they asked me to lead this brand new Energizer that nobody had done before. And now I'm explaining to 300 people what we're about to do. So we went from being shy and quiet and not doing anything to, you're the opening act for this week, let's go. And from that point on, being on stage and being in front of people has been the one place where I am most comfortable. Fast forward to my senior year in high school, we did a one-day leadership style thing at a local college up here in North Georgia. And I asked Lawton Baggs, Mr. Baggs, I said, hey, I'd like to give the closing motivational speech. I gave a great motivational speech, had people applauding. I was like, wow, I really can do this. And then the following year, they asked me back as a college freshman. I gave another one, again, rave reviews. And I remember going home and looking at my mother and saying, this is what I want to do for a living. I want to be a motivational speaker. I want to be a public speaker. Whatever that is, that's what I want to do. This is before social media. This is before social media influencers. This is back when everybody had AOL Instant Messenger. There was not GeoCities was how you wrote a personal website. And she looked at me and she said, that's great. I've seen you do it. You're great at it. You can't make a living doing that. And for whatever reason, anything my parents ever said to me, I never really took too much stock in it, but that one went into my ear and lodged into my brain. And then for the next several years, I was floundering. So during that time, towards the end of that, I meet a young lady, fall in love with her. And finally, I was like, this is getting serious. I need to go ahead and start a career so that if we get married, I can support her, because I'm not going to be able to support her this way. So I went into banking, and all of that, every bit of that, just got completely pushed to the side.
So life happened, basically.
Yeah, there's your act one.
Life happened. I get it. I've talked about this before. The generation now, I feel like they have it a lot a lot easier. There are a lot more options. And like you said, with social media being out there, and who would have ever thought that you can make a living like doing reviews and taking videos of yourself, like putting makeup on, or I don't know, there's all kinds of crazy stuff that people can make money off of now. Back when we were younger, it was like you had a path that you had to pick, and that's the only way you could go. And
My mother and father, loving mother and father. Mom passed away a few years ago. Dad is currently recovering from a stroke, but they have been wonderful parents, and they made sure that me and my little sister Amy did not go without. But there was something about, and I think this is the overall message that I'm going to get into today, is that the path is you do A, B, C, and D, and you do those in that order. And there's going to be some people that just have better circumstances. You don't.
mhm.
So I meet who would end up being my wife when I was 19 and she was 17, before your brain is fully developed. It's always a great time to do that. She was and is still absolutely gorgeous. And my mindset was of a scarcity mindset. And if she's listening to this, I'm sorry that she's hearing this, but
Uh-oh.
I honestly felt like I would never be able to do any better than this person. She was smart, she was beautiful. We could have intellectual discussions about stuff. She was supportive, and so I made sure to get engaged, to marry this woman. At that point, I am working for a online banking institution. I'm there about a year, and that's when the subprime mortgage collapse starts happening.
Mm.
And they're letting us know we're selling the bank, which was a very polite way of saying, if you've got something that you can move on to, now would be the time to do it.
Mhm.
I move into an insurance role with a company here in Georgia selling home, auto, life insurance. And during that time, we lose a house because we were one of the stupid people that bought more house than you could afford, with creative financing that was happening at that time, lower lending
I was
restrictions.
actually doing real estate at that time, so.
Okay, perfect. So you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yep.
That crashed. We had racked up a lot of credit card debt trying to get her through college because she was still finishing her degree. And at the same time, we wanted to start having children. Things aren't going well. We end up having our first child. At this point, we were back down to a one-bedroom apartment. My oldest, Hazel, is born in July of that year. In October, after 3 years with this company, I am told my services are no longer needed, which was terrifying. I knew I did not need to be at this particular organization 6 weeks in, but I had told myself, well, I've got myself into a pickle. I have no college degree. They had the potential to pay me a lot of money, but a lot of it was commission based. So sometimes there were months where there was no money. Pretty sure I knew it was coming the day before. And I had told my wife, I said, I have a feeling this is going to happen. And sure enough, it did that day. And we went out for lunch right afterward. And we went to a little Mexican restaurant. And I looked at her and I said, I have to apologize to you for what this job has turned me into. And it will never do that again. 4 weeks later, I am slinging chicken at the Publix deli. But it is very hard work that I'm just not good at. I was slow about cleaning. I was slow about making sandwiches. I was slow about everything. And I was there, I'm guessing, almost a year. Meanwhile, during all of this, my buddy who I had told you about, Brent, who we were academic bowl captains, had started hosting trivia on his own.
Ah.
And one night he had to go out of town. He said, I know you can do it. You've played this game hundreds and hundreds of times. You know how to host it. Come fill in for me. I filled in for him in the spring. In the summer, I filled in for him again for 3 nights for a week. And then in October of that year, I started picking up my own shows. And within 3 weeks, I had 4 shows, and it has been nonstop since. While also slowly backing into traditional corporate environment and working job after job after job. At the same time that my firing took place was about the same time that Conan O'Brien got screwed out of The Tonight Show on NBC. Now we go back to my desires of being a TV personality. For those of you that don't know, or those of you that are younger and don't really know the institution that The Tonight Show is, that was the show that Johnny Carson hosted for 30 years. Jay Leno hosted it for, I'm guessing, almost 20. And that was considered the holy grail for any comedian, was to become the host of The Tonight Show. And what essentially happened was, from my understanding, ABC had come to Conan and said, hey, we'd like to give you a show at 11 o'clock on our network. And he was thinking about doing it. And NBC said, if you'll stay with us in 5 years, we'll make you the host of The Tonight Show. And he did. And they did it for 10 years. They moved Jay to a 10 o'clock show, which killed any of the ratings lead in that the Tonight Show spot at 11:35 after the local news would happen. And after 8 months, they basically told Conan, you're out. And they moved Jay Leno back. For me, it was such an allegory of what was going on in my life. It was like Conan did everything that you were supposed to do. He went A, he went B, he went C, he went D. Why is he the one that's getting screwed over?
Mm-hmm.
But as I started to build this trivia career, was about the time that Conan's rebound started happening. He did a national tour. He showed up on TBS doing a talk show, which was very successful. And then his documentary came out about the tour he went on in between. And that was when I started realizing what it meant to put your life back together when things crumbled. And I started consuming a lot of his content. And one of the things he said, I believe it was Dartmouth College during a graduation speech, he said, and I'm paraphrasing, but there's nothing more freeing than your worst fear being realized. And for a lot of folks, when you fall and you fail and you hit the concrete, there was no immediate bounce back. It felt like a splat. It was very humbling because I had always been able to get by, and it was just crushing. And so then that's where trivia came from, which was supposed to be, in my mind, like a 6-month thing I would do until I found something better. And now here we are all these years later.
It always happens that way. But I do feel like, there is reasonings behind it, and all that you went through prior to that, it brought you to where you are now. And I'm sure with doing 2,200 shows, I mean, you've got to have some good memories there, probably some crazy ones too, especially doing bar trivia. People are usually drinking and, it can get interesting.
We've had some really strange answers. We had a upset girlfriend show up and throw beer on a ex-boyfriend.
Oh no.
That was the only time I've ever, wrote out a police report, witness report while hosting the game. I didn't stop. One of my longtime players, Jason Parr, was very impressed with the fact that I played Why Can't We Be Friends right after that happened on the music. There have been nights where I've had to yell at cheaters. There have been nights that I have essentially had to draw a line in the sand with venue owners, how much control they thought they had over the game. And it's like, I work hard on this, so this is going to, this is me.
Mm-hmm.
But if you sit down and you tell somebody, what do you do for a living? Well, I'm a trivia host. What does that mean? Well, essentially it means I ask people who are drinking and eating questions. I turn Post-it notes that they hand their answers into a paycheck. It's like it does not make any sense. But what I have noticed, going back to one of the things we talked about earlier, what makes this a business and not a hobby?
Mm-hmm.
The hobby people that I see host trivia do it one night a week. They sit down, they work for a company that provides them the game. But when you're working for yourself as essentially a one-man gang, especially going up against these big companies, it's like having a mom and pop hamburger joint going up against McDonald's and Wendy's. That's where the business is. The business is being entertaining. The business is engaging people. And I think that translates into any business that you turn into. The moment you decide that it's no longer a hobby and it becomes a business, whatever it is you're doing, in my eyes, you go back to being a regional wrestling promotion. What's going to get people in the door, whether it be for whatever you're performing for or what your store is or what your product you're providing? What is your catch? I'm in the middle of reading the book Nitro by Guy Evans, and he quotes Eric Bischoff, who was the longtime president of WCW during their heyday in the mid-90s. And when he got that job, they were competing against the WWE. And he said, I knew I could not be better than them. He said, and I didn't want to be less than them, which for a lot of years, WCW seemed to be the light version of WWE. They'd have similar characters. He said, but I can sure be different than them.
Hmm.
And whatever we're picking up, whatever is not being served by the WWE audience, I could be different. He looked and said, who is the WWE taking care of? They're taking care of younger kids. Their entire market was essentially from like 7 to 13. And then WCW decided to go from 18 to like 40. So the product got a little bit more PG, a little more PG-13 rated. Eventually, the WWE had to do the same thing because that was the shift in the market when that happened. So when I will go and I will play these trivia games at other places being hosted by other people, and I would go, what can I do to be different than them? Number one is stand up. I will stand up the entire game. Number two is I will make self-effacing comments that are humorous about me. I'm never going to put anybody down in the audience.
I
And
feel like that comes from trauma.
oh,
From
oh, yeah, absolutely. But we
because
ain't got that. We ain't got that kind of time. The story goes on as I continue to host trivia. I end up with 2 children with my wife to then go through a divorce after what I feel like we have climbed out of the career crisis. And by the way, during most of this time, I'm in therapy, and I'd like to convince all the men that are listening that therapy is a great thing and you should absolutely do it and find you a good therapist who fits you like a good pair of shoes.
Thank you for saying that because I am
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you,
100%. I feel like everybody should be in therapy.
I
So
have
I
I
want
have
to
a
go.
great therapist who has taken care of me very well, and she identified that the marriage was something was not right in the marriage well before I did. I kept focusing on the career stuff. We're the reason why the marriage is stressed is because there's not enough money, and then she realized I don't think it's all that. But then she was able to go live her life. I was able to go live my life. And then you're able to see some of the things about my personality that I married her young because I thought I wouldn't do any better than this. Our brains weren't done forming for one thing. So you throw that in with the comment from my mother of you can't make a living like being a public speaker. Well, now here it is 2,200 shows later, and while I'm not quote unquote a public speaker speaking on the public scene yet, I have been in front of probably more people than the average person ever will be. There should be a tendency to go back and ask yourself, what did I enjoy doing as a child? What was the things that were maybe ignored because of childishness? And my thing was to always pretend I was a game show host. Now, you can host game night at your home, you can host game nights at your church, you can host trivia one night a week. And those are all great hobbies to have. And there's nothing wrong with that. And if that brings you fulfillment, especially if you're not as fulfilled in your career, then great. Sometimes it's okay for your career to be the funding mechanism for the thing that you are supposed to be doing. There's nothing wrong with that. As long as you have this thing over here that is driving you.
Hmm.
But if you don't have that, if you don't have enjoyment and you're working something that you're not being fulfilled in, that should be the red flag. And if I can make a living turning questions and post-it notes into a paycheck, there's a very good chance that whatever you are good at and whatever your skill level is, whatever your talents are, that you can turn that into something that brings you joy.
100%. I've said this before, like I'm an idealist in that I do feel like I could find something or I should be able to find something that I actually enjoy that I could make a profit from.
Mm-hmm.
But it essentially being my hobby, a lot of times these hobbies that we have, we can try to turn them into a business and then we realize that's not a good idea. There's a lot more in there. Like you lose that joy of
Right. It
the
can kill
hobby.
it can kill the ability to enjoy the
Hmm.
thing.
Yeah.
I'm very cognizant, and I have even spoken with my trivia players that I am closer to the end of hosting trivia than I am the beginning.
Hmm.
You are gone 3, 4. There was a time I had 6 shows a week because we had to pay the bills. You do that at that level, you're getting home till 10 o'clock at night. But the great thing about this, and I think this also goes into the narrative of careers is that we got to get out of the mindset of what is this one thing I'm going to do for the rest of my life?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I need to find my career and spend the rest of my life doing this. Why?
Yep.
It feels like we've gotten away with the idea that you can not only change your mind, change your jobs, but change industries. And I think there's a lot of real gatekeeping that happens, but I also think there's a lot of artificial gatekeeping that's in our brain.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we're our worst enemies there because I recently talked with a career coach who specializes in these career pivots for people who are wanting to go in a completely different direction.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that we were talking about is what age is too old to make a change
Right.
like that?
Right.
And of course, the correct answer is never.
Right.
You could really do that. But I even see myself back, even in my 20s, going, oh, I could go and, go back to school and do this. But that's going to take me 4 years. And then by that
Right.
time, I'll be like 29, and that's like so old, but whatever age you're at, you're kind of doing those calculations, going, oh my gosh, it's going to take forever. And then here you are, 20 years later going, where the hell did time go?
Right.
What happened? Like I could have done all of these things, but whether it's just the time of when we were brought up, the job landscapes at that time as well, things have changed so much.
There's a great author in this career space by the name of John Acuff, and I highly recommend a lot of his books. His book Do Over is such a powerful book, and it's essentially he had a job that he had worked towards in his late 20s, early 30s, working for a company that he thought was going to be his dream job.
Mhm.
And he left that company on his own accord and essentially had to become an author again from scratch by himself. And then the book Do Over talks about that. And he talks about a career savings account, which is all of those skills you pick up along the way that help you be able to do the things that you need to do. And for me, in my business, with the trivia business, I've wanted to repurpose the trivia into books or other kind of media or podcast or everything, but I also don't have the passion for it, at
Mhm.
least at this point. So for me, I may be slipping back from business into hobby because I don't think you have to live in one space either. We got to stop thinking in absolutes. I was a very rigid person in my early 20s. These are the rules, and the rules are the rules. And we do these things because that's the rules, and this is the path that you get to. And then when you get to 55, you can retire, or 65 and retire, and then you can live your life. Well, not to be morbid, my mom passed at 60. My dad had a debilitating stroke at 62. I'm 41. What if I only have 19 years of good health left? I do not want to be in a place where I'm going, I did not experience enough joy. So now
Mhm.
we take every rule and we don't throw them away, but we now ask what the purpose is behind them. And then we decide how to rebuild from there a life that I'm going to be the one living. If you have recently lost a job or you've recently are rebuilding or you're trying to do these things, find people that are doing the things that you want to do. During this development of this trivia show, I ended up knowing and talking to and trading games and trading questions with like 5 other trivia hosts. It's so much easier to do things with community than it is alone. And then the other thing we've got to stop doing is using the word just. What do you do for a living? I'm just a homemaker. Oh, I'm just a teacher. I'm just a this. I'm just that. I'm just that. And it's an idea of being humble, but it's you tell yourself a lie enough times, you'll start to believe it. I get a little riled up about all
No,
this.
no, you're 100% right. I mean, something that's come up a lot is like imposter syndrome in what are we able to do? Because we do get in our own way. And like when I said, oh, I'm going to do a podcast, and I have tried in the past putting myself out there on YouTube and sharing stories about like weight loss, my struggles there. And it was so uncomfortable that I was just not at the point where I am now, to where now
Right.
I'm just like, screw it. I don't know if it's age. I've talked about this with others as well. It's like, is it age? Is it like this midlife crisis thing going on? Or is it really what I've learned in my time?
It is when you get to the point that you run out of fucks to give.
Mm-hmm.
There is, and a lot of that does come with age, but a lot of it also comes with I am just sick and tired of getting beaten up and dropping to the canvas trying to fight the way everybody else has told me to fight. I'm going to get up and I'm going to fight the way I want. And you were talking about imposter syndrome, and I am not going to take credit for this idea. I read it elsewhere and I don't remember who. But the thing about imposter syndrome is imposters never feel it.
Sure.
Imposters never think that they are being an imposter.
Yeah, it's dealing with those insecurities.
When you get to a level of confidence in whatever skill you have, and then someone consistently starts telling you no, 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 and you're sitting there like, I'm going to try to be humble and understand that I could be wrong in this situation, but I also know that I know my stuff, and if this is not where I need to be, I will walk away, and I know I will be okay. You might not be able to walk away in that moment, but you can also go, all right, it's time for me to update my resume. It's not midnight yet, Cinderella, but the clock is getting close. It's time to move on to whatever it is. And the other thing that I think a lot of people get tripped up on sometimes, and it takes a big shift to do this. We'll talk about it in the realm of my business, the trivia business. And for a lot of your listeners, they may be starting a business. I got into a very intense debate one time about who is my customer. And the debate was from the other party was the trivia players are your customer. And my response to that person was, show me where they have paid me. The venue is my customer. They are the one that writes me the check. The players are the product. I'm sort of giving people a free service. They're coming in exchange for being a part of the free service. They are doing that. And then the venue writes me a check. Now, if you work a traditional 9 to 5 job, your initial mindset would be, well, I don't have customers. And I would say, no, it's the same thing. The company that you work for is your customer. You are selling your time and your labor and your knowledge that you have acquired throughout your life to that employer. Customer has told you what their budget is. $14 an hour, $22 an hour. And you get to decide as the owner of you Incorporated whether or not that is an acceptable price for the knowledge. And it's also why typically younger people get paid less than older people, because older people have had more time to acquire the knowledge. Now, does it suck as a young person when you're trying to get started and you're doing everything you can? Absolutely it does. If I'm working somewhere as a 41-year-old and the 21-year-old comes in and we are making the same amount of money, if all things are equal education-wise, that's where you have to start doing some soul searching. You have to start doing some thinking. You have to start thinking about what you're worth.
I remember when I was younger, and it would always irritate me that I didn't make as much as my other coworkers who were much older than me, even though I knew I was better. I knew I was doing things better because I put my whole heart and soul into whatever I was doing because I thought that's what you do, right?
Right.
But I feel like if there is a scenario like that now where a 20-something comes in, doesn't have as much tenure as I do or whatnot, but they are making the same as me, it all kind of goes back to knowing what you're worth.
Right.
One thing that I've heard a lot from like entrepreneurs is like, how do you know how much to charge for your services?
Oh, that's a great question.
And it's what do you think your services are worth? And if we're not as confident in ourselves and our ability to do what we're doing, we're going to undervalue. So typically younger people would probably undervalue themselves, but then as you get older, you're realizing this is not acceptable and this is what it's going to be. And if not,
right,
peace out, I'm gone.
In conjunction with hosting trivia, somebody said, hey, can you DJ a wedding for me? We're getting married. Yeah, absolutely, I can. Well, how much do you charge? Well, I've never done it before. So I was like, it's probably going to be twice as hard as a trivia show. So that was what my rate was.
Mm-hmm.
After doing about 3 of them, I realized that I didn't want to do one anymore because it was so much work. Oh, well, what if we paid you this amount of money? All right, I'm kind of motivated to do it again. So I went to the next level of money, and I did that at that level for years. And so then I became self-employed, and now I have an even bigger amount of money that when that money comes in and it's like, hey, we want you to do a wedding. Okay, this is the amount of money that's going to make me feel like giving up a Saturday and running a bunch of cable and running a bunch of speakers and dealing with an outside venue. Oh my God, if it's going to rain or not. dealing with a cranky mother-in-law who's been there all day and can't understand why she's not allowed to give a toast, and children who want to go running around the dance floor and running into people, and a wedding coordinator who is already done with everybody and is ready for everybody to go home when we still got 3 hours left. All right, this is the amount of money. And if you and what I tell people now is, I know you're going to find people that are more expensive than me, and you're going to find people less expensive than me.
We talked about your journey so far, and it's not over. I know you probably have a lot more things. You said you're kind of on the way out of the trivia piece,
Right.
but of course, one of the questions I like to ask is, money not being a factor, if you could do anything, what would it be?
I would love to be an improv comedian. People like Colin Mockery and Ryan Stiles and Wayne Brady and Drew Carey. I would love to be a game show host. I've been blessed to be. One game show that I've been on has aired. There's another one that'll be airing soon as a contestant. I would love to be a game show host. We've talked about ring announcers for wrestling ring announcers. I will never have the voice of being able to do that. But people like Gary Michael Capetta, David Penzer, the way they do that now.
Can you do your best impression of it? Please.
My best
what do you
impression
think? What do you
of a ring
think?
announcer?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
I'm trying to see if this is really in your future somewhere.
Ladies and gentlemen, the following contest is for the hard-hitting trivia world championship. Let's introduce the challengers. So that would be the other thing.
That was pretty good.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Please cut that out.
No, absolutely not. That part I'm keeping.
A public speaker, I would love to be able to share ideas on stage. I've had the pleasure of doing that a handful of times. And then maybe just a humorist, for lack of a better word. I really wouldn't call it stand-up, in the vein of like Mike Birbiglia. Everybody should have a comedian the way they have a band, and that should be one of the things in your toolkit as you're moving on through life.
I like that. I was trying to think of who my comedian would be.
For years growing up, for me, it was Jeff Foxworthy.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, Mike Birbiglia is probably the top of my list, but I also love some Bert Kreischer. I like Bill Burr.
I will tell you the funniest person that I saw live, and more along the lines of a cleaner comedian too, is Howie Mandel.
Yes.
Back in the early-ish 2000s, my mom and I went to Las Vegas and saw him live there, and I did not stop laughing the entire time. Your favorite trivia category? Do you have one?
To ask or to answer?
So yours to ask. And I guess we'll ask also yours to answer. So yours to ask first.
Favorite trivia category to ask? Varieties questions.
Varieties.
And for those of you that are listening, I usually give the example of that would be if I give you three things and you got to tell me what they are varieties of. So if I said boxer, greyhound, and beagle, you would say dog. If I said diamond, sapphire, and ruby, you would say gemstones. My favorite category to answer, I'm usually good at 90s television.
Okay, so here's one. 3 people dead or alive that you would like to have at one of your trivia shows.
I would like to have Ken Jennings there. Ken Jennings has played and hosted multiple game shows, and I would want his critique on how I'm hosting. Along those same lines, it would probably be Drew Carey, mainly more for the improv experience, to see what he thinks about that.
That would be fun, actually.
I think so.
I like that lineup. That would be good. So what's next for you?
What's next for me? That's a great question. I am in the end stages of getting my associate's degree. I am currently working a day job as a dues administrator for a nonprofit. And then I do think at some point I will be laying down trivia. I made the announcement last night as we're taping this that I would be continuing for one more year at least. There's just so many other things I want to do. I want to take stand-up classes. I want to be able to take improv classes. I want to be able to try to find what other things that would bring me joy that I'm not doing right now.
I think you have a lot of good things lined up, and you're going in a direction that
it's why I'm so tired. Aren't we all tired? Everybody.
It's a never-ending grind. Brian, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. I really appreciate you coming on, offering insight on the experiences that you've had, things that you've learned from in your own experience, and giving us a little backstory on how you got to where you are now. I'm wishing you nothing but the best of luck in the future for everything that you're going to be attempting to do, which,
Thank you.
it's a lot of work. I mean, it is, but I'm
It
glad
is.
you're doing a lot of this self-work and exploring things that are going to be good for you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure being here. Thank you for inviting me. It was a great time.
Yeah, and I would love to have you back to catch up with you in
Absolutely.
time, and maybe we can have a few career-based trivia questions that you throw out.
Oh, that's a good idea. That's a good idea.
But yeah, we'll catch up. We'll set something up and we'll see you back.
That sounds great.
If you're interested in becoming a guest on my show, all the information on how to contact me is available in the show notes. Also, if you're enjoying the content and would like a shout out in an upcoming episode, a link in how you can support this podcast is available in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time.